Spectrum TV,
broadening your horizon.
Spotlight Africa, Kenyan Governor Kwariwa impeached over husband's role. Joe Biden says U.S. is all in on Africa's future. In DR Congo, leader calls for U.S. pressure on Rwanda. In Ghana, inflation hits decades high to over 50%. Plus, praise for Morocco despite World Cup defeat by France. These stories are all just ahead on Spotlight Africa. Do stay with us. First in our stories today, a Kenyan politician who was among 7 female leaders elected as regional governors in the August general election has been impeached. Kwariwa Mengaza has been accused by members of County Assembly MCAS is her husband, who is allegedly playing a prominent role in the Meru County government. Mengaza has defended her husband Meruga Mbaku, saying that she had only appointed him to voluntary roles, in her administration. Reports say 67 MCAs voted to impeach her, while 2 abstained. According to Kenya's constitution, the governor will remain in office until her fate is determined by the National Senate. Still in Kenya, following a national outcry, the daughter of Kenya's president has denied that public money is being used to fund what she calls the office of the first daughter. In Kenyan law, no such office exists. Meanwhile, many Kenyans online have been expressing anger over her engagements and asking who is funding them. Some have described her as a low-budget version of Ivanka Trump, who regularly attended political functions while her father Donald Trump was U.S. president. Some have nicknamed her Quick Mart's Ivanka, referencing a low-cost Kenyan supermarket. But she does not seem to be too upset, and tweeted head of South Africa's embattled state-owned power utility firm Eskom has resigned. Andre de Ruyter handed in his resignation earlier this week. He's yet to comment on his leaving nor the reasons for his decision. De Ruyter's resignation comes amid crippling blackouts across the country from collapsing. Reports say the role of Eskom head has become a kind of poison chalice in recent years, with bosses abruptly leaving either due to public dissatisfaction or seeming government interference in its running. South Africa is currently on level 5 rolling blackouts, which means no less than 6 hours of power cuts during the course of the day. Still in South Africa, where opposition politicians say they will challenge a vote in parliament that rejected an impeachment inquiry against President Cyril Ramaphosa. He easily survived Tuesday's vote in the National Assembly that could have initiated proceedings to remove him from office. Ramaphosa is accused of confirmation movement, described the decision not to investigate the president as irrational, and said it would appeal to the High Court in Cape Town on Monday. Meanwhile, the opposition Democratic Alliance said it was weighing its legal and parliamentary options. Ramaphosa is now in a stronger position to be re-elected as ANC's president at his party's conference, which starts on Friday. Meanwhile, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni has come under online criticism after his official Twitter account posted a misleading image of Wenzori Mountains in an attempt to show the beauty of the mountain. The Wenzori are a range of mountains which includes, instead of showing the Ugandan mountains, the image President Museveni shared shows Mount Sefton, which is found in the Alkari Mounts Cook National Park in New Zealand. In the post accompanying the image, Museveni said he had continued to highlight the unique beauty of Uganda, the marvel of Wenzori, and the good high-altitude climate during the visit to the UK and the US. Away from that, dozens of members of Ethiopia's federal parliament from Oromia have urged the government to hold talks with a banned rebel group to resolve the security crisis in the region. Oromo Liberation Army Ola has been proscribed as a terrorist group. In the past 5 years, rebel attacks and confrontations with military have made areas in western and southern parts of the populous region insecure and almost in revenge attacks. In a letter to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, the 80 lawmakers urged his government to end the insecurity. Meanwhile, recent violence has forced tens of thousands of residents in Ohoro Guduru and East Wolenga in western Oromia out of their homes. In a related development, the head of the UN's public health body has accused Eritrean troops of killing his uncle in Ethiopia's war-torn Tigray region. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus of the World Health Organization so far made no public comments on the accusation. Speaking at Wednesday's WHO briefing in Geneva on the latest COVID-19 issues, Dr. Tedros said he was informed that his uncle was murdered by the Eritrean army. Dr. Tedros also expressed hopes that a ceasefire agreement signed in November between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF) will hold, and that the madness conflict in Tigray erupted in late 2020 when Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered a military offensive against local forces in the country's northern region. He said he did between Abiy's government and leaders of Tigray's dominant political party. Meanwhile, the Ethiopian government and health officials in Tigray say food, basic medicine and equipment are now reaching many in urgent need following the peace deal signed last month. According to Kidiya Gebrewot of the Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF), malaria has become epidemic in some districts. However, the situation remains very serious across the region as critical pharmaceutical supplies are lacking. The UN says by 8 December 2020, Tigray, including medical supplies. Meanwhile, the Ethiopian government has also distributed food aid to some areas in Tigray, following what it describes as the improved security situation. We move now to Mozambique, where a member of a local force supporting a government operation was killed in clashes between Mozambique's security forces and the militants operating in the report said that the militants attempted to stage an assault against the army outpost in Nova Zambezia village, Macomia district, in a bid to steal weapons and supplies. Reports said the defense and security forces succeeded in repelling the assailants. The report added, "Meaning tell the story of the leader who calls for U.S. pressure on Rwanda." To stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned, and now to the rest of the stories. The Democratic Republic of Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi has asked U.S. President Joe Biden to put pressure on Rwanda in order to stop its support to the M23 rebels. The two presidents spoke at a bilateral meeting during the ongoing U.S. Africa summit in Washington, D.C. The U.S. has previously called on Rwanda to stop its support to the M23, while Kigali has under President Kagame said there was nobody who would come from anywhere to bully them into something to do with their lives. In the U.S., the presidents of Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, and Angola met to discuss the Eastern DR Congo security situation, which Tshisekedi did not attend. The presidents met to review the implementation of Luanda and Nairobi's agreements, meetings that have taken resolutions on the conflict. It came as the M23 rebels held their first press conference in Bunanga town in Eastern DR Congo, which they have controlled since June. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has announced big such gathering hosted by Washington for 8 years. The summit is seen as a U.S. attempt to reassert its influence in Africa to counter Chinese involvement. It also comes after Donald Trump's 4-year tenure in office, during which he alienated numerous African leaders with policy decisions and insulting comments. Biden struck a very different tone to his predecessor, speaking optimally for improved links with Africa and telling the gathering that when Africa succeeds, the United States succeeds. He said that the crisis facing the world today needs African leadership. To that end, Biden announced $55 billion of U.S. funding planned for Africa over the next 3 years. The sum includes millions of dollars for clean energy projects and $300 million for internet access and digital technology. The U.S. also met to sign a memorandum of understanding with African and continental leaders, which Biden said would unlock new opportunities for trade and investment between the U.S. and Africa. Elsewhere, Liberia's largest prison, the Monrovia Central Prison, has begun turning away new inmates due to overcrowding and fears of disease outbreak. Justice Minister Frank Musa Dean told Newsmax that prison guards were refusing to admit new inmates as part of an ongoing strike over a delay of salaries, but prison officials have denied the claim. The prison was built to hold around 300 inmates when the population of Monrovia was about 300,000. It now holds over 1,600 inmates in a city of about 1.5 million people. Reports say inmates at the facility include convicted murderers and armed robbers. We move now to Ghana, where annual inflation rate has increased to 50.3% in November, up from 40.4% in the previous month. According to the latest figures by the Ghana Statistical Service, this is the highest inflation recorded in more than 2 decades. It is attributed to a of 79%. Recall that on Tuesday, Ghana reached an initial agreement with the IMF for a $3 billion bailout subject to approval by the Funds Board if the country meets all the requirements. The deal is expected to help restore Ghana's economic stability and ensure debt sustainability. However, the government has to restructure the country's debt to sustainable levels to qualify for the loan. Meanwhile, domestic bondholders have rejected the government's decision to exchange $10.5 billion into making significant gains against the US dollar after losing half of its value this year. But it has not reflected in the prices of imported essential commodities. The cocoa and gold producing in West African country has been struggling to deal with the worst economic crisis in a generation, which has resulted in street protests in the capital. Away from that, Libya's top law officer has ordered a probe into the handover of a Lockerbie bombing suspect, Abu Aguila Massoud, to the U.S. government. Abu Aguila Massoud is accused of making the bomb that downed Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie in 1988 killing 270 persons. Multiple sources have claimed that he was abducted from his home in November and held by a second militia group before being transferred to the U.S. Meanwhile, Lord Advocate Dorothy Bain has told the Scottish Parliament that Massoud's transfer to U.S. custody was lawful. However, Libya's Attorney General Sadiq al-Sir said his office had received a legal complaint over Massoud's removal and that the results of the investigation would be announced in due course. On a sad note, rescue workers have found 11 more bodies of people killed following floods on Tuesday in the district of the city, where many houses are built on hillside areas that suffered landslides. The floods have been termed the worst in years witnessed in the city. Reports say nearly 30,000 households have been affected, with 280 homes swept away by the landslides. Meanwhile, President Felix Tshisekedi is due to return to the country today from Washington after shortening his petition. More than 140 people have died. Reports say the damage to infrastructure is significant, with the majority of residents in the capital experiencing water and electricity outages. Officials on Tuesday ordered the demolition of buildings standing on unstable locations and those putting pressure on the drainage system. Lastly, Moroccan fans have heaped praise on their football team's performance despite Wednesday night's World Cup semi-final 2-0 loss to France. The team made history by becoming the first African and Arab nation to reach the stage of the competition. I beg your pardon. Morocco's King Macron also praised the Moroccan team for their history-making run at the World Cup. And that's all we have for you at this time. Do ensure to follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which you can, and do enjoy the rest of your evening.